Divorce lawyers, what's the most outrageous reason someone filed for divorce? Story 1. My client was the outrageous one, so my heart went out to his poor wife. He had OCD, which manifested primarily financially, so he made their lives a penny-pinching hell. Examples: he was obsessed with avoiding unnecessary driving, wear and tear on the car, gas expenses, so he cut the whole family's hair at home and never let them eat at a restaurant or go to the movies. Weirdest of all, he kept one toilet paper roll on him at all times, and you had to get 1 square from him before you could go to the bathroom. He never gave more than 1 square. Wife finally got fed up and left him when 1, he gave her bangs during an in-home haircut, and 2, their daughter was so traumatized by the toilet paper thing they couldn't potty train her. Also, he hated paying his divorce lawyer bill. He was also an old-fashioned mega-Catholic who considered divorce a deadly sin. He viewed my whole job as an unnecessary and sinful expense. Story 2. My aunt was dating an unemployed dude for a while. He was staying in her house rent-free. They got married and were getting ready to go on the honeymoon when the new husband tells her he's not going because he has to take care of his plants at the house. Big fight. Aunt goes on the honeymoon with her sisters instead. She comes home and tries to kick him out of her house, but he refuses to leave. She tries to get the police involved. Dude is live streaming on Facebook how he is being trapped in his own home. Police tell my aunt there is basically nothing they can do, can file for eviction after a divorce. Dude gets to live in her house with his precious plants for like 3 months until everything legally gets worked out. Story 3. Wasn't the reason that did happen during the course of the divorce. Neither side would follow the court orders. When they had to go back to court, they were fighting over a toy pistol and the man's grandmother's bowls. I assumed for weeks that these bowls were some sort of heirloom or expensive china. When they finally brought the bowls in to swap, they were Tupperware. Story 4. He was frustrated by her hoarding. She was frustrated by his utter uselessness. He filed for divorce, and she was my client. Her prized possession was a room or 2 full of scrapbooking materials. His prized possession was a yard full of junk cars that he never worked on. They had no children and no real assets. They hated each other more than any 2 people I'd ever met, and the only terms they would agree to were these: he gets the scrapbooking stuff, and she gets the cars. My client also took the house, as he had no income and didn't want it anyway. It was the shortest divorce decree I ever drafted. I intentionally squeezed it onto 1 page, and the judge and I had a good laugh over it. Once the decree was signed and filed, she hauled all the scrapbooking stuff to the yard, and he removed it to the dump. She then called a junk shop I referred her to and had all of his cars removed from the yard. Story 5. Not necessarily the most outrageous reason, but definitely some outrageous conduct. The saddest divorce we were hired to do, but ended up not doing for reasons that will become apparent, was a woman in her 50s whose husband had really just let himself go. He was over 400 pounds, just did his 3rd triple bypass, refused to do anything different, just smoked and drank all day long while watching TV. His doctors told him he was going to expire in 6 months if he didn't change his behavior. He told them they were all morons and could go to hell. Meanwhile, his wife is this successful woman who makes over $10,000 a month on her hobby, while making 6 figures in her normal work. She lost all respect for him, all desire, and all love for him by watching his decline. For the past few years, she can barely stand him. It also sounded like there was some verbal abuse going on where he constantly accused her of cheating and gaslighting her, while cheating himself throughout their marriage, and spending all his money on D's, the usual. His accusations ramped up considerably once she lost about 200 pounds the good old-fashioned way. We were working on her divorce, and one of her provisions was that he keep her as the beneficiary on his life insurance, for obvious reasons. She assured us he would agree to everything she suggested in the paperwork if she talked him through it. One day we get an email from her saying to halt the divorce, not because they were reconciling, but because he refused to keep her as the beneficiary on his life insurance if they divorced. So she stopped the divorce, so that she could get the benefits when he inevitably expires in a few months. One time, we had one where the opposing party husband found out his old wife, late 70s, was terminally ill. He started using every tactic in the book to delay the final hearing so that she would die before their divorce was finalized and he wouldn't have to lose anything. We just got another where the couple agreed to everything beforehand, signed documents, agreed to a dissolution and how to share custody. Now husband needs a vengeance and wants to trash the dissolution, take everything from her, and take their kid from her. Why? because she told him no when he asked for their kid a full day and night ahead of schedule, when she had already made plans with the kid. Story 6. He got drunk at the wedding, she did not like it, and decided to divorce him right after the honeymoon, which she went to without him. Moreover, this was all an elaborate scheme of divorce robbery, because the guy was loaded, and so was his entire family. They were loaded because they were a family of excellent lawyers, and he was a third-generation lawyer, with all the smarts and experience of his predecessors combined. Let's just say it did not go well for her. Story 7. I'm a lawyer that handles quite a few divorces, among other things, and I've seen all sorts of reasons for marriages ending. The only thing that is consistently true and relevant to this question is that it is never for just one reason, and it is never one-sided. In fact, I've started telling potential clients in our initial interview that I am well aware that I am going to uncover some dirt on my client in the process, not to scare them, but to put their mind to ease that I've seen worse. The fact that you haven't been 100% an angel up to this point doesn't scare me, and I'd rather find out about it from my client beforehand than later on from their spouse at the worst possible moment. All this is just to say that when you hear about people divorcing over one stupid argument or mistake, usually that's just the straw that broke the camel's back. That said, some of the lighter straws I've seen include: first, a guy who is 100% convinced that his wife, our client, is actually a gay woman in love with his sister and just using him as a cover, but he also claims she is making love with me to pay for her legal fees, and with every male whose phone number is in her call history. Second, a woman who is divorcing my client because he was too sad after his father died last year. My client had to break down her door to get his father's ashes a few weeks after he left the house, and she refused to let him back in or give them to him. Third, a woman who claims my client was emotionally abusive towards her because he refused to yell at her and sat in silence ignoring her when she screamed at him. He has this recorded, time-stamped for the dates and times she insists the incidents occurred, and she's listened to them, and his complete silence as she goes on tirades and insists this proves her point that he was emotionally distant and abusive. Story 8. Failed exorcisms. Client had an inner ear condition that caused chronic vertigo, but symptoms could be treated with medication. Husband was an evangelical who was convinced his wife, 1. had become possessed, and that her vertigo and general crankiness with his methods were evidence of demonic possession. 2. The medication she was taking was enabling the devil to hide inside her, and 3. The only proper recourse was exorcism. He would hide her meds until she got dizzy, and then try various methods of exorcism. This included sweating it out, but under blankets while incapacitated and locked in a room full of space heater. Freezing it out, pretty much the reverse with AC, fans, and bags of ice. Surprising it out, he would jump out and scare her like it was the hiccups, but instead of yelling boo, he would recite the Lord's Prayer of Psalms. The final straw was that he tried to surprise it out of her by pushing her down the stairs when they were heading out for dinner. Note, this guy was some type of executive, and they still went out to dinner after the stairs incident. She asked for the divorce at an Applebee's that night. I've often tried to picture that conversation, as she was adamant that he was a total sweetheart and never acted out of malice or anger. Story 9. Staff attorney for a judge. Not a divorce, but a custody modification hearing. Ex-wife wanted sole L&P custody of the kids because the ex-husband was spending all his money on a palm reader/psychic and refused to pay child support. On cross, ex-wife's attorney got him to admit that he was spending all his discretionary income on this psychic. He said he had spent over $5,000 on readings and other services there. Judges frequently chime in with questions in domestic matters, so my judge asked why he was not paying support as his divorce decree required. His explanation was, 1. The psychic could read that his children were provided for without his money, and 2. He would be able to repay the ex when he takes the children to Mexico permanently to seek great riches there, which my judge read as my psychic told me to kidnap my kids. Story 10. I knew a guy from a high school job who divorced his wife of 2 months because she would sleep with a nightlight, but he could only sleep in total darkness, as they apparently never lived together until after getting married. He hated her nightlight so much that he would often sleep on the couch instead, but sometimes he would claim the bed for himself and lock her out of the bedroom for the night. This was an eccentric late 40s man working at a Burger King who acted like all the other high school co-workers were his best chums and often told us these weird stories. I'm glad I don't work with him anymore. Story 11. My client put his wife in an assisted living facility based on a misdiagnosis, the medication of which caused the wife to be unable to care for herself. While in the facility, my client Shocker started dating another woman and methinks began using hard Ds. He used a lot of money on both of these things. She eventually got off the medication and got better. Suffice to say, she was not happy about what had transpired. Story 12. I got into scams because a lawyer in my old office represented a woman whose husband left her because she got involved in a romance scam that started as a pen pal. It was a word marriage. He was clearly a closet gay who married her for her money because she was ugly as all hell. They kept separate lives for 30 years. She began corresponding with someone she believed was a 3-star general serving in Afghanistan. It went the typical way scams like this do. She fell in love, and he needed money to move from Afghanistan back to the United States. She eventually would transfer him about $70,000 over the course of 8 months. Even when my friend brought me into the conference room to lay out the case as being a scam, for which I had piles of proof for, she continued to transfer money, including a $8,000 transfer the day after. The judge ruled she owed her husband dollar for dollar what she gave the scammer, so $70,000 plus he issued a temporary restraining order barring her from transferring marital assets. My friend dumped her as a client when she showed interest in appealing the TRO and trying to expedite her divorce so she could marry the scammer. Story 13. My 90-year-old client, the husband, and his son retained me to initiate divorce proceedings with his 88-year-old wife. They'd been married 60 years. The wife had recently taken to beating him with his own cane because their daughter poisoned her into thinking he was hiding money from them. The battle came down to husband and son versus wife and daughter. At their first court appearance, my client showed up in an old 1950s-style pinstripe suit and fedora. He was a farmer his whole life, and this was clearly the only suit he owned. He was such a meek and lovely old gentleman. I had to pass my client on to a new lawyer midway through the proceedings because I accepted a job in a different country, but I understand the divorce was eventually granted. Story 14. Paralegal. A couple got divorced over a cat. Wife called the cat Snowball because of white fur and only wanted the cat to eat wet food or chicken. Husband called Cat Lily again because of white fur and believed it should only eat dry food. These two argued for a year over custody of the cat, but did not give a crap about their human kids aged 15 months, 4 years, and 6 years old. Story 15. I do my student practice at my family's law firm. Young woman filed for a divorce because her husband drank 1 beer during weekdays after a day of work. The guy wasn't violent, doing Ds or anything like that. He was just a normal, polite guy who liked to have a cold one after a 10-hour shift. They're a very good couple and argue so rarely that this woman's friends told her to write down everything he did to upset her and reread it every day, so she had reasons to be angry about. My mom lawyer set the woman straight, told her he's just doing what all guys do and to find herself new friends instead of ones ready to sabotage their marriage. Story 16. I'm an intern, but the judge I work for used to do divorce work. He has some crazy stories, but this one is probably the most outrageous, though the divorce was pretty justified. Every morning this couple would sit in the bathroom together while one of them had their morning dump. One would sit on the toilet and the other on the rim of the bathtub. This particular morning the wife was on the toilet and husband on the edge of the tub. They start to argue about their relationship, so the wife reaches down, pulls her tampon out and flings it at husband. I'm told the tampon stuck for a brief second to his forehead before sliding off. He filed for divorce that same day or the next. Story 17. The client's husband was divorcing her because she had transitioned from a woman to a man, then back to a woman again after regretting the first transition. The husband realized he preferred men and couldn't cope with the second transition back to a woman. Two great people who just couldn't make it work together, I have to add. Story 18. Not the most outrageous, but I had a client incur about 20 additional hours of billable hours because he and his ex-wife were battling and went to trial over their Star Wars collection. This was the only issue at trial. They were able to work out custody, child support, the house, but the Star Wars collection went to trial. The judge ended up splitting it in the most foolish way possible, basically giving each side half of what they wanted, and then mixing and matching everything else and breaking up collections. When speaking about it at a conference, the judge admitted she did it because if they were going to act like children, she would treat them like children. The thing is, the value of this collection was over $100,000, so hardly kid stuff. Neither side had it in them to appeal, nor was the case law on either side given judicial discretion in property distribution. Story 19. Not a divorce lawyer, but used to practice criminal defense work. Once had a heavily pregnant client that attacked her husband of less than a year with an iron. Said client was now sitting in a police cell, sobbing and insisting that her husband deserved it and she wanted a divorce. I asked what he had supposedly done, assuming he'd cheated or something similar. Turns out she checked his phone and found a single site in his browsing history from over 2 years beforehand. Not the most pleasant thing to discover, but hardly worth battering him half to expiry and demanding a divorce. Story 20. My husband's first marriage lasted 6 months. He found out she had been fooling around with several of his friends, and one of those friends finally felt so guilty that he fessed up. Husband actually wanted to work it out if he could, but when he tried to talk to her about it, she locked him out of the house and told him she wanted a divorce. "Why'd you marry me?" he finally asked her. Her response, because he was the only one she was making love with who could afford her dream wedding. Yup, she married him because she wanted a wedding and chose the person who could afford it. Mind you, he wasn't wealthy by any means. He just wishes his friend had felt guilty about, say, 6 months sooner. That's a wrap for this video. Make sure to leave your relatable story down in the comments. I would love to make a video on them. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.